welcome everyone to this webinar, and I'm also very happy that you are tuning in from all over the world to learn about TMS WEB Core today. That's what we are going to talk about and discuss, especially in the area of building user interfaces with WEB Core, as this offers quite a bit of possibilities to discover. First of all, I want to give you a quick introduction of what WEB Core is and what you can do with it. And that also means for which targets what you will learn today is applicable. So with TMS WEB Core, with the framework, you can generate classic web client applications. So web applications that run in the browser and offer users web access to your applications. But that's not all. In addition, we can also target what is called these days progressive web applications. And that means that you create an installable mobile application for your iOS or Android devices. And creating a progressive web application means that it will sit on the home screen of your smartphone just as if it is a native application, and you can use the application this way also in offline mode. So what we will learn today about user interface building is also applicable to this type of applications. And finally, it is also applicable to creating desktop applications from web applications. So with web technology, you create desktop applications. That is all done with the Electron framework, which TMS WEB Core supports. And this way, you create desktop applications that run on Windows, Mac, or Linux. Now, let's give a quick introduction of how the architecture of a TMS WEB Core application is designed. So basically what you create is an application that consists of an HTML file and a JavaScript file. So the entire application is packed into a JavaScript file that is generated from your Delphi code. And this JavaScript file with its HTML, CSS, images, etc. is loaded in the browser and is running from your browser, be it on a desktop, mobile device, or an iPad or similar devices. When we talk about connecting to a central database, there are several ways to do that. This is typically referred to as the backend. The backend is dealing with the database access, and so several solutions in that area are available. We offer ourselves the TMS X-Data product that helps you building a REST API access to your backend. But equally possible, it is to use the Embarcadero RED server product and technology to create a backend for your database access. Or you can use an open source solution like Node.js or an ASP.NET Core backend. So there are several possibilities for offering that communication connection to your backend, your database, and other services that you might want to keep server-side. And so this is basically the architecture of how everything works. So on the left, we have the JavaScript application hosted and running in the browser. And this application is loaded from your web server. In terms of server technology, web server technology, a web core application can be hosted on any type of web server. So be it Microsoft IIS on a Windows, or an Apache on a Linux or a Windows machine, or other servers. So any HTTP web server is sufficient for hosting and serving your web application to the users in their browsers connecting to it. And in addition to that, you can have on the same server, not necessary, but it can be on the same server, it can be on a different server, a backend if you have a database in the backend. Then you have typically your REST server on the backend, and it is your web application that will make REST calls, REST API calls to that backend. And actually, it is a very similar way to creating a FireMonkey application that runs on a mobile device, where the database is not on the mobile device, but where you will use an Embarcadero RED server, an XData server, or another server technology to connect from the FireMonkey mobile device application to some central database. So today we are going to focus on user interface design. As I said in the introduction, there is a myriad of possibilities to create that user interface, and that goes from the starting point is what I call the classic VCL style form design, the way of designing forms that we are used to ever since the very beginning of Delphi in '95. And then gradually we will introduce web-specific features, like using CSS, for example, and browser organized layout, to the use of HTML templates. So where you will just grab on the internet available templates. There are a lot of free templates, a lot of paying templates for typically a small amount of money. And these kinds of templates is what you can use to create your user interface design for your web core applications. So let's start with VCL style based user interface design. And here are some typical characteristics of such design. The VCL is based on an absolute positioned and an absolute size form design. That means that if you position a specific user interface control at a specific coordinate with a specific size, that is the size that will be used at runtime when your application is running. And so this approach is also possible out of the box with the TMS WEB Core framework. We are used to controlling with properties how your user interface controls will look, and also this is possible in the WEB Core application. But in addition to that, there are possibilities to control the look and feel of your controls with CSS and CSS libraries, like Bootstrap is probably one of the most popular libraries for web interfaces. Responsive design is something typically desired, needed for web applications, just because of the fact that you, as a developer, you don't know in advance if some user will access your application from a smartphone or a tablet or a desktop, and you might want to adapt the look and feel, the layout of your application to the form factor of the design, the device that the user is using to connect with. And in that, let's say, classic VCL style user interface design, we also offer a couple of helper components to allow you to take advantage of this responsive design. So this is, let's say, the first steps of creating the user interface with WEB Core. And I now propose that we will have a look at IDE and have a look from there how we can accomplish all these things. So here is my Delphi IDE with WEB Core pre-installed, and I start a new WEB Core application by going to File, New, Other, and there we find in the menu the TMS Web plugin that offers you to create a web application from here. So we will pick a regular web application, and this application is now being created for us, and it's almost there, and here it is ready. And we find here the form designer that we are used to in VCL or FireMonkey applications. What I will do is first of all save my project, do some folder. Let's have a look. And we pick the folder Barnston for this presentation webinar organized by Barnston, and I give it the name VCL based UI. And here we will save our project. Maybe have a quick look at how this project is organized, what we have in this project. So we have an HTML file. And this is the project HTML file, and this is actually the HTML file through which the application will be launched. So if you put that HTML file on your web server, it is via access to this HTML file that your application will be started. And in this application, we have here just one form. Unit 1 is the unit for this form. And we find here the DFM file that we are used to for VCL applications. And in addition to that DFM file, we also have an HTML file. And this is the place where we can put additional HTML for this application. If we inspect the content of this HTML file in this empty application, you can see that this is like the bare minimum HTML for an empty web page. And so what we are going to do here, we see our form class. What we are going to do is do classic VCL style based user interface design. And so for that, we will add a couple of controls. I will pick a button, an edit control, something very classic that we have all done a million times before for VCL applications. And I add just one line of code to fill the list box with the text from my edit control, like this. And so when I run this application, it compiles the Pascal code to JavaScript code. This is the process happening now. And when this process is ready, it launches the browser. And as you can see, the user interface, we have a kind of what you see is what you get. So at the exact position on the designer form, we find here at runtime in our web client the controls, and obviously the functionality is working as we expect. Now, it is interesting to have a look at what has now actually been created. So here is the source for our application, and it has generated the files needed for our web application in the output folder. We are in debugging mode, so under TMS WEB Debug, we find the project HTML file through which this application is launched. You find this here, and the application JavaScript file. So this is the compiled application into JavaScript, and here we have the unit HTML file. So this is the HTML file for form 1, but as I indicated, this is an almost empty page with respect to HTML. We also find here this project1.js.map file, and this file has one specific purpose, which is to allow you to debug with Pascal code from your web browser. So if I open the web browser, the console of the web browser, here we have the console and the sources, and as you can see, I have here the Pascal code for our web application, and I can put breakpoints here at Pascal code level. So when I would add some text again, you will see that this breakpoint is hit, and I can inspect and step through the code. And so the map file is for the convenience of debugging your application using Pascal code. But that's not the topic of today. The topic of today is building user interfaces. So that's why we will not go in depth in this area of debugging. So first possibility, the really classic VCL user interface design capability that you are used to for VCL applications, and that you can apply this concept to web applications as well. But of course, we might want to go a step further, and we might want to apply, for example, some CSS. So let's introduce one of the most popular CSS libraries, which is Bootstrap. And if we right-click on the project in the Project Explorer, here we have this extra menu option, Manage JavaScript Libraries. If I click this, I can see a lot of options that I can add. And for the sake of simplicity, I will just add here the Bootstrap version 3 library. When I do that and I inspect my project HTML file and inspect the code for that. Okay. Then you can see that here, this link to the CDN of the Bootstrap library was added. So what I did here in this context menu with Manage JavaScript Libraries was automatically adding a reference to this Bootstrap library. When I have I'm getting some feedback. What exactly is happening? Hello? No, not sure why I got the message, but okay, let's continue. So what I can do now is apply Bootstrap styles to the controls here on the form. And I can do that via the element class name. And so here I can pick all the Bootstrap styles that are now available because I just added the Bootstrap library to this project. So it's thanks to adding the Bootstrap library that I'm getting access to all these Bootstrap specific styles. If I would have added another CSS library, I would see the specific CSS classes for that other library. So here I will pick a number of styles for my input box, and those who are a little bit familiar with Bootstrap will know that form control is a classic one, and so I pick form control for my input box and my combo for my list box, form control, and here I have a button, and I can here assign button primary, which is a classic Bootstrap class for controlling buttons. What I will also do here is, as CSS is gradually taking over my design, I will let the button deviate from the standard width and height. You can see that we not only have a width property for each control, we also have a width style and a width percent property, and similar for height, we have height percent and height style. Standard default, This is set to absolute, meaning that the width that we have specified will be the width that we will see on the form when it's running in the web browser. But I will now put this to auto. And by putting this to auto, I leave it to the CSS and the browser layout control to determine the best size for my button. So when I run this application now again, what I see here is that you can see that my input control is already looking different. We get this subtle shadow-like effect when the control has focus, and we see that we have a typical bootstrap primary button style for this button control here. And we could, of course, also add our own CSS and use our own CSS. So if I would, for example, open the project HTML file and introduce some my red style, and here I set background color to red, like this. And let's put, I think I can best put a panel on the form. Okay, and here element class name, I should find my red style here. At design time, this is not visible, but it should be at runtime. And so this way you see that you can use CSS to style your controls on the form. Maybe it's also good to have a look at the HTML that has been generated, the HTML that is used to create our form. And so you can see here that we have the HTML button element. So you can see that a web button control in the web framework is really at runtime nothing more than a basic HTML button element. So it's a really lightweight wrapper around HTML, basic HTML elements with which you build up your applications. The native HTML element, there is nothing, let's say, simulated and really completely developed as a Pascal class. No, it's a wrapper around what is available in HTML. That has an important consequence, which is that subtle differences between something like an edit control on a Windows machine versus an iOS device or a macOS operating system, this will all be respected. So an edit control on a Mac will behave like a browser edit control and not be something generic or common that is designed in Pascal. No, it's taking advantage of what is offered by the browser. And so here we have the input element, here we have the list box, and our panel is in this case a span, an HTML span, and you can see that the CSS class, my red style, was applied to this panel. Okay, so that was a first step showing how we can move from classic VCL design layout and classic VCL look of the components and add here some bootstrap or CSS styles in general in the mix to make your applications look nicer. What I will do now is introduce the concept of a responsive design. And what I will do is I will remove this and create something new. And what I add here is a responsive grid panel. This is the responsive grid panel. And as you can see, when I resize this grid panel on the form, you can already see the red indicators here at the bottom. A red indicator with some pixel size as on the indicator. What this actually means is that for these specific widths, the organization or layout of this grid panel will change. And this is controlled by the layout property. So here we have the layout, which is basically a collection of different layouts. So I have a layout for the case where my grid panel width will be less or equal to 575 pixels. And in this style, I will have one column. So one frame width column is this called. When I am, my control has the size between 575 and 686 pixels, then I have a design with two columns, and it goes on. If between 668 and 991, I will have three columns, and I will have four columns whenever it's larger than 991. In this small demonstration, I will remove two layout settings, and I will just keep the setting for a size below or higher than 575 pixels. So now I will add some controls to this grid panel. You can see I added a label. It sits here on the responsive grid panel. I will add an edit control, and it sits in the second column. I will add now one more label and one more edit control. And this is how it looks like. Now, if I resize the responsive grid panel at design time, you can see that it already automatically adapts its design or layout depending on the width of the control. I will do some subtle further fine-tuning by changing some properties of the layout. So this is the case or the layout for when I have one column, and I can specify here in pixels some specific column and row gap. So if you pay attention, well, now it has no effect. My layout chosen is the two column layout. So if I apply here a row gap and column gap of 20, you see that the positioning of these controls already changes. What I will also do here is change how the height of my responsive panel is controlled. And I will set therefore the height style to auto, meaning automatically adapt the height of this responsive grid panel to the needed height depending on the controls in this responsive grid panel. What I also need to do here is make sure that the size of my grid panel will change as I change my browser size, and to do that I will enable anchoring. And so when I run this application, let's play with the size of what we have in the browser. Now we see that we have a two column layout anyway, and so when the width of my browser window decreases below 575 pixels, we see that we switch to a one column layout and the controls sit under each other. This can use some more fine tuning, and so I will show you how we can do this fine tuning. Here's one more thing, this doesn't make sense. Okay, so what I will do now is suppose that this is the place where you enter some name and city of a person. Let's clear the text for these controls, and let's make this caption, make it name, and here we make it city. And what I would like to do is if I'm in the 2-column layout, that this name label will sit closer to my edit control, and when I'm in a 1-column layout, that my edit control will just be below the name label and the city label. So what I will use for this is also bringing some CSS in the mix, and I will apply a different CSS to my 2 labels here, depending on the layout of my responsive grid panel. And to do this, I have the onLayout change event of the responsive grid panel, where I can add some code. And this code will depend on what the layout, the active layout is in this responsive grid panel. And so here in this event, it returns the layout that is in use for my grid panel. And so what I use as a condition is if the index of this layout item is 0, meaning it is the first layout item from my collection, I will apply some CSS to my labels. So if the index is 0, what I do is I pick this label and I use the element handle. And the element handle is actually a reference to the HTML element behind my label. So you can think of it as something similar to a window handle for a VCL control in a VCL application. So where the window handle in a VCL application is really the handle to the Windows class that is used in your executable, here element handle is a reference to the outer HTML element of your web control in the web application. And what I can do with this HTML element is programmatically change its style. And I do this via the style property. And the style property has different settings. And one of these settings is the float setting, where I will set the float, and I will set it to left for the case where it's a 1-column layout. Okay, and I will set it to the right for the case where we have a 2-column layout. If I set it to the right, my label will be positioned automatically on the right side, close to the edit controls. And so let's see at runtime what happens when I do that. Okay, so now we already see the effect. We are in the 2-column layout, and my label is now positioned on the right side. If I decrease the size, the width of my form, you can see that I get to the single-column layout, and my label is here again left floating. These are some basic capabilities of the responsive grid panel. I would like to show you an example that is somewhat more extensive to show you when you can combine all these capabilities, what result you can get. So here is a more extensive demo where we actually use 2 responsive grid panels in each other together. So here we have the outer responsive grid panel, and here the inner responsive grid panel. And so here we have that 2-column versus 1-column design. And here we have a left sidebar. And so with the outer responsive grid panel, we will make the left sidebar visible or not, depending on the form size. And so when I run this application, let's have a look at how that behaves. So this here is the result. So now I am with the desktop size, and now I will resize and you can see that we this panel here changes to a single column. And if we resize further, you can see that the left sidebar is disappearing, and we just have a one column. So this is what we could typically see for editing contacts on a smartphone. This is what we will maybe see on a tablet, and this is maybe the best layout for entering contacts on a desktop. What you can also see is that when I make this smaller, now when the left sidebar disappears, you see that we get the large logo, while here it is the small logo. So also that is something that was done programmatically. And here you can see that I set the URL for an image control to different images depending on the layout of the responsive grid panel. So this gives you already a somewhat more complex example of what you can do with this responsive grid panel. Let's go back to the slides now. And so this is a summary of what we have already seen. So absolute positioning versus browser positioning. Controlling with CSS some style and look and feel of controls, and using the responsive grid panel for our responsive design that we do with components from the form designer for the web core application. In the next step, I want to introduce how you can also do relative user interface control positioning, and letting the browser do automatically the control layouting and sizing, but still do all of this out of the form designer in the IDE. So therefore, we will start a new application. I pick again a new simple TMS WEB Core web application, and let's put this in a folder here, and I give it a name, relative. Okay, save this project. Okay, we are ready to go. And I will actually do the same. I will add an edit. I will add a button. And let's also add a list box. And what I will do now is I will change a number of properties. Element font. This property tells the control that it should use the settings under this font property to set the font for the control. I can also set this to CSS, meaning that just use the CSS to determine the font of these elements. What I also have here is that the element position is set to absolute. And here I will set to well, I can choose both for this example. I will set it to ignore. That means that the web application will not use the top left width height of these controls. I set the element position to ignore. And so if we, well, I can still connect, of course, my logic, web listbox.items.add web edit one text like this, and let's see what happens when I do it this way. This is the result. So now the positioning on the form designer is no longer used. It is now the browser that will control how these controls are positioned in the form. And of course, what you see here might not make much sense. When we inspect the HTML, we can see, okay, we have here the select, which corresponds to the list box. We have our input HTML for the web edit control, and we have an HTML button for our web button control. So now is the question, how can we more, let's say, fine-tune the layout of these controls, but still from the form designer? What I want to do is group these two elements together and then position under these two controls, position under the list box. So what I will do to achieve that goal is I will add an HTML div. And so this is a lightweight container wrapping an HTML div element. And so I will now just move my button and my edit control to this div element. And my list box is here. And what is important now, we can already see the result of doing that. And I overlooked one thing, which is that I should, of course, also set the element position of my div to ignore, because I want my div to also be automatically layouted by the browser. And now this is the result. What you can see is that the browser has rendered my list box first, and the div element automatically is layouted on a new line, and it has grouped the edit and the button together. But this is, of course, not what I wanted. I want that my edit and my button is first, and then my list box. So what is causing this? This is caused by the child order. So the child order determines for controls that have a relative layout in what order these controls are rendered. So here, obviously, I should set the child order of my div to 0 and the child order of my list box to 1. And if we have a look at the result now, this is the expected result. And you can see that the logic to add the text to the list box is still applicable. That logic, that code that we wrote is still applicable. What I see also here is a gap between the edit and the button and the list box. And this is because I did not allow the browser to automatically control how the div size is, but I kept it to absolute. If I set the width and the height to auto, then you will see that these controls will fit together like this. Now, here I have done all my design in HTML. Nothing prevents me from adding some additional stuff directly in HTML. And so this could be the header. Let's say we add a div. Oops. We add a div. This is the header of the page. And when I specify this in HTML, you can see that this is the result. Of course, it has, I need to reorganize my child order, so to ensure that my header is really sitting at the top. But you can see that you can easily mix HTML and relative positioned controls on the form. So this is a different approach that you might want to choose, and you can freely mix between these options to control how your page will eventually look for your application. And now I will go, let's say, I will leap further with the third way to create forms, layouts of forms in web applications, and that is by using an HTML template. And so what we will see is how we can use a template for a form. We will see how we can import the template from a given source, and we will see how we can bind controls to HTML elements that are in the template, and we will also see how we can bind events from HTML elements in the template to code in our form, and that thanks to the web element action list. So now I will start a new application. And let's, okay, a new web application. And let's save it somewhere again in this same folder. Oops, let me go here, and this will be, I will give it the name paper, and you will see in a moment why I give it the name paper. Okay, my project is saved and ready. And now I will go to the folder here where I have a template named paper, and this is the template that I will be using for this web application. Let's close these tabs for all the previous projects, and let's navigate to a website that does nothing but offering templates. And so you can see here from this website, Creative Tim is this website, and you see here a preview of one of the templates that they offer, being the paper dashboard template. If we navigate to the website, Creative Tim, you can see here that they offer nothing but templates, all kinds of templates. And you see there are some templates free and some templates are paying. I believe that here there is some place where you can select free templates. Okay, and here, for example, was that paper dashboard template. This is the one that we are going to use now, and you can see plenty of free templates you can get from Creative Tim. So if we have a look at the template, this is actually the zip file that you download from Creative Tim. And if we unpack that zip file, this is the content of the template. And you can see here the assets, some examples, but the assets is what actually makes up this template. If we go one level deeper under assets, you will find lots of CSS files. You see that Bootstrap is involved in this template. You can see some specific fonts used in the template, some images also involved, and some JavaScript here. And finally, also some extra files and some demo files. So these are the assets that make up this specific template. There's also here this template.html file, which is a sample HTML file using all the style elements from this template. So let's open up this template, and here you can see how the style of this template will look when you create your application. And this is the template that we are going to use here today for creating a web core application. So what I do for this is, first of all, I will import the assets into my web core application. So I have here the folder of my paper web core application, and I will use the assets in that application. Now I just put the assets folder in my project folder. Now it's important to import these in my project, and I do this in the following way. I choose import folder, and I pick the assets folder, and now it's working a little bit. And after doing some work, you will see that in the project it will have added all resources connected with this template. So here you see all files that are involved added to the project. Okay, we could also have added files one by one, and maybe left out a couple of files that aren't used for our specific application, but doing import folder is just something that is way faster. Now, we are going to have a look again at how the template HTML itself is looking. Here we will have a look at the template HTML file. And I have here an editor where I can quickly inspect the HTML for the template. And so this is what the guys from Creative Tim created to create such an templated file. What we typically see here is, and this is important, is a bunch of JavaScript that is invoked to create this template. You can see here that it uses jQuery, the Popper library, some Bootstrap JavaScript, some specific JavaScript for some scroll bar effect. In the demo, they are also using Google Maps, so that's why they have this reference to the Google Maps API. And they also use some charting, so have the JavaScript reference to the chart.js JavaScript file, and some further Bootstrap notification plugins, etc. So this is a bunch of JavaScript that is connected to this template. It is recommended to, if we want to use this template for a form in our project, to move these JavaScript files and make these centralized in our application. So that means that we will move these out of this HTML and move it into the project HTML so that it is automatically loaded when the HTML for our application loads. So that is what I can already cut out and move to the project HTML. And this is something I did in advance. So what I did is, if we have a look at the form HTML, you can see that it is the same file, but I stripped out the JS from this template HTML. And what I also did was I have my project HTML. And so you can see here that I moved the JavaScript references to the project HTML file. So with this prepared, I can now integrate this into my application. So I open my project HTML file, go to the Code tab, and I will simply replace this HTML by the prepared HTML for this template use. And you can see here that these are the extras that are inserted. And now I go to my form HTML file, that typically empty HTML. And what I will do is just copy and paste and put this into this HTML connected to my form. We can already have a look at the result of doing that. And this is now how the form of our application using a template is looking like. And what we are going to do now is integrate user interface control logic from our WebCore Delphi application into this template. So what I will want to do is I will want to host the logic of our Delphi forms in this area and make this sidebar here navigatable, so that if I click this one, we will see a first form. When I click this one, we will see a second form. I will do some integration with this search bar, etc. What you can also see, important to know, is that this template is also responsive by itself. So if I change the size of the browser, you can see that it automatically adapts to the size. So everything with respect to responsive behavior, we will automatically inherit this in our WebCore application. So the first task now is to hook up things from our application into this template. And an important step here is how I will hook up specific elements to actions code in our WebCore application. So what I do first is give you a look at how this template is constructed. And here you can see this part of the HTML. This is the left sidebar. You can see here the first item, second item, and third item. So let's maybe for the focus bring the template back. And so this is first item, second item, third item, right? This is what you can see here in the HTML. If I want to connect some Delphi code to, for example, a click on first item, a click on second item, that connection will be based on giving these HTML elements a unique ID and binding logic, control logic, user interface logic to these specific elements based on the ID. So what I need to do is actually give these items an ID. So the first item in this list is this one here, and I can set the ID to, for example, site 1. This is the unique identifier for this first item. And the same applies for the second one, where I set it to site 2. And here I set it to, for example, ID equals site 3. Okay. This is actually what I already had prepared in advance. Remember, I separated the JavaScript files and put them in the project HTML. And in that same process, I already prepared, as you can see here, the ID for that element and this one and this one. Okay. And so now, using that, let's have a look at how we can hook up functionality to these HTML elements. And what I do for this is introduce a web element action list. And this is basically a collection of actions that can be hooked up to events triggered by HTML elements. And so here is the collection, and I can add actions to these. Okay, I add 3 actions because obviously I have in my sidebar 3 items. And so this is the first action, and I want this to be triggered when something happens with side 1. So remember, if I inspect the HTML, I will want something to be triggered when this LI item with ID side 1 is clicked. So here, this has automatically detected all HTML elements that have some specific ID, and I can pick from that. So I pick here side 1, and I will pick side 2, and I will pick site 3. Okay, and I have here by default the option that this action will be triggered when a click happens on that HTML elements. As you can see, I have a lot more JavaScript events that I can hook some specific action to, but here for this example, the click will be sufficient. When that click happens, it will trigger the on-execute event of that action list item. And so in that action list item, I can add some code. More specifically, well, here I could add the code in my second item, the code to create my second form. Of course, I first need to have a second form in my application. So let's add that first. And so in the context menu, I can choose create a new TMS web form. And this way, form 2 has been created. Form 2 actually will have exactly the same HTML as form 1. So let's open this one. I will just copy this to the second form as well, like this. And now it's a matter of hooking up this code and making sure that the second form is opened when this item is clicked. So I can choose application, create form, and that will be an instance of tform2. And we will use that form variable that's available, that's automatically created in actually a very similar way as for the VCL application. It's in unit 2. So this will from here create a second form. Now what I need to do if I want to navigate in my second form to my first form, I will need to add some similar code obviously to my second form. And so let's open this second form and I add this element action list where I have the same actions already. And so if I click the first item, obviously I want that my first form is opened from there. So I do create form 1 in the form 1 class. And obviously this needs to know about form 1, so I add unit 1. It's not really visible because now in my here in my form designer, my form 1 and my form 2 are two empty forms. So I will not really see the difference between the first and the second form when opening these. So let's add some code, some controls and some code to these forms so that we will be able to see that it actually concerns different forms. So add and edit again the same pattern over and over again. Listbox.item.add of web edit 1.text. Okay, that will be something in my first form, and in my second form I will just add a control with an image, so that it's easily recognizable that this concerns my second form. And so I pick some image that I prepared. Under resources, I have this logo that I can insert here. Okay, and let's set this to auto size. Okay. So I have two visually different forms that I will easily recognize. There's one more thing that is important, and that is, remember, if I reopen the template, that I want my form to be displayed here in this area of the template. I don't want that this is used, for example, this here. And what I need to do that is have a look in the template what HTML element represents this specific area where I will want my form to be displayed. So if we have a look at the template, actually the easiest way to find this is, where is this text your content? And we can see that this is the place where the area is where we want our form to be displayed. So you can see that it is actually this div here where I will want my form content to be displayed. If I now have a look at the form that I prepared, you can see, well, I didn't use it. I could have used the div, but I used the H3. It does not really matter. But what you can see is that in this element, I added the ID web form, and that will allow me to specify for my forms that it is in this HTML element that I want my form to be rendered. And so how can I do that? I'm here in form 1, and I can choose my form container. So this is the container that will host my form, and you can see that it has that web form element that I can choose here. And of course, I will want to do the same for my second form that I will also host in this area. I also specify that it is displayed in the web form HTML element. So we are curious, we did a lot of work to see if what we created so far will do what we expect it to do. So this is our application, and you can see that the first form is rendered automatically. And when I click here on the second item, my second form is shown. When I click on first item, first form, so I can toggle here between my first and my second form, and it's nicely integrated into our template. You might have noticed, of course, that regardless of clicking the first or the second item, I do not see, like here, the item in selected state. Let's inspect what is causing this selected state. If I go back to the template, and if I actually show you the template, you can see that the first item is in selected state. It has a different color, and it has this little angle sitting there. And if I inspect the HTML, what I see is that this item here has the class active. So it is the CSS class active that determines that the selected item is displayed in orange with the angle. The other items do not have the CSS class active, and so are displayed in a regular way. How can we programmatically achieve that effect in our Delphi application? So what we are going to do is, when the form is shown, we are going to manipulate the CSS of that element and specify the active class. And so what I do is here, pick the HTML elements. So I use get elements by ID of site 1. So the site 1 element is actually the element that I want to be active when my first form is shown. And this way I can set the CSS class attribute to active. Okay. And I will actually do exactly the same, but for site item 2 in the form show event for my second form, but I specify site 2. So let's have a look at how that works. This is some small, okay, copied too much. Let's have a look what the result is when compiling. Okay, and as you can see, it has automatically set the first item to active. If I activate my second form, it becomes the active item, etc. So that's already mission accomplished. I can interact with the CSS of my sidebar to activate the right items in the sidebar. Now, next step will be, let's close some tabs. Next step will be how we can bind something to the search bar. Okay, so as you can see in the template, well, here is the search control, and here we have that search icon, and we want to connect some logic to this user interface element. So what I'm going to do is drop an edit control on the form, and I will give it a name. I will give it a name ed search. And now I need to inspect in my HTML where this search is. So let's have a look for search. And what we can see here is that we have that input element. So that's the HTML input element for the search. And here is, this is actually a material icon that is being used for showing that hourglass search icon. I will refine it a little bit here. I will open the HTML. Okay. I will go search for search. Okay. And what I will do here is give that the ID search, and we'll give that one the ID search button. Okay. And what I will do now is I will now set the element ID for this web edit control to search. By setting the element ID for this web edit control, I actually map or bind my web edit control to that HTML input element here in my template. And what this means is that I could, for example, use the edit control on change event, and it will catch all on change events for that HTML input element in my template. Or I can use the on click or key press or any other events. I can also, by using edsearch.text, immediately get the value of the input control, which is actually the input control in my template. So by setting the element ID, this edit control is automatically bound to the HTML input search element. What I will also do now is add another action, and that will be an action for a click on my search button here. So I select the search button ID, and I will also handle the click. And in that click event, what I will do is I will make it simple. I will just add the value of what I entered in the search. So I take the ed search.text, and I will add it to the web listbox.items.add search.text this way. Okay, and there's one more thing that I need to do, which is let's empty this value. Otherwise, this text value ed search will be automatically put into my search control. So let's see what happens when I run it this way. here is the form. So obviously this will do what we expect. And so if I enter something, well, that's nice, okay, ESP32. And if I click that button, you can see that this content is added to the list box. What I didn't do here yet is maybe some finishing touches, is specify some CSS for my controls that I added on the form, so that they look in a similar look and feel as the other elements on the form. So what I will do for that is I will set the element font to CSS. I will also make these element class name, I set these to form control, because this template is also using Bootstrap. That's something I can do. Specify that classic Bootstrap style for controls, for regular controls on the form. And what I will do is make this a button primary, which is also a classic Bootstrap style for buttons. The only thing that I will change is I will let Bootstrap determine the width and the height of this control itself. It has its specific rules for that. Also, a little bit with respect to margins, you will see that Bootstrap has its own settings for that. And let's see the result. Okay, and so now you can see that it already fits better together. You see that it picked up the font here of my template also for these controls. And so, yeah, this way we have an example of how we can use existing HTML templates to give your application a really nice look and feel. This is the basic steps. You might wonder, or a remark is that you have seen that I had the need to add my web element action list to form 1, form 2, and add the code in each of these forms. We worked out this specific sample a little bit more extensive. And this is the project. Actually, this project is included in the demo, so you can, if you download or have WebCore installed, you will have this demo, if it's the latest version at least. And so what you see here, how I handled or dealt with this in this particular demo, is that I created a frame and I added this reusable logic of the web element action list that deals with the menu, etc. I added this to a frame, and I just dropped or repeated this frame on every form in the application. Okay, and so I just had to develop or write this code once, and just by dropping the frame to every form in the web application, that logic will be reused. So if I run this application, this is how it looks like. And so here I have different forms. You can see there is some CSS animation, which is a part of the template. What you can also see is here that I have set the title for the page specific to the form that is opened. And that is also actually handled by this label that is bound to an element, the menu element. And so it is this label content that is used to specify the title of the page for each page in this web application. You see config, customers, and orders. And so with that, I covered, let's say, from the very basic steps where you start off by using VCL style approach for designing your forms, where your forms will be what you see is what you get. I mean, what you see in the Delphi form designer is what you will get in the web browser, to a design that uses existing HTML templates, uses CSS classes to give your forms that additional and nicer look and feel, and everything in between that is possible to style or determine the layout for your user interface. So with that, that was the part of my content. And so now let's have a look if there are questions. And I don't see. Okay, one question I see here is, if time allows, I would really like to do the classic UI where you have a scrollable grid with data and a pop-up modal window for editing records. That is maybe a little bit much for quickly putting together, but I can give you a pointer for these pop-up dialogues, which is shown in the demo multiform. And so in this demo, what we have is the main form and a secondary form. And so I can choose here different settings for launching the secondary form. So if you run that application, we can choose to create the form in a pop-up style, like this one. And now you can see that the form is shown on top of these controls are no longer able. So it's displayed in a modal way on top of the existing form. And I can close the form again and get the notification for that. I can also show that pop-up form with a caption and make it resizable, and then it looks this way. So this is the secondary form now, and I could also make it resizable. So if we have a look at that code, here you can see how the new form is created and shown a model. And here are some properties that control whether the form is having a caption, whether it has a resizable border or not. Here you see the method that, well, actually we create the form here. And here we show the form model. Important to know here is that we have an anonymous method, and this anonymous method is triggered when the form is closed. So that's one possible way of catching when a form is closed. Another way would be assigning an event handler to new form dot on close. That's another way to deal with the form closing. But I thought it was a nice example of using anonymous methods for that, and with the model result, you can track whether the user has closed the form with the OK or cancel. I hope this addresses that question. And let me have a look if I see no other questions, unless I'm overlooking something. I don't know, Margriet, if you are there.
Yeah, sure, Bruno. I'm there. Do you hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
Okay, well, thank you for the presentation. It was great to see what the team has done over the last couple of weeks or months or whatever. So it's really good to see how things are improving, and also how you can use TMS WEB Core. So I hope everyone enjoyed this webinar as well. So, and we did not get other questions outside the chat box. So these are the questions, I guess.
Okay.
And maybe I can take the opportunity to let, because I did not see the screen in my introduction, but we do have some special offers in case you are interested in this TMS WEB Core or some other products from TMS Software. There's an exclusive Barnston offer until the end of this month, and we provide a discount of 20% on these TMS components. So that's maybe something I wanted to share.
Thank you, Margriet. Exactly, I think this is indeed an exclusive offer from Barnston. So if you have an interest in this offer, please send your queries to the team from Barnston, and they will happily help you.
Yep, absolutely. Okay,
so thank you. Yeah, thanks everyone to tuning in on this webinar. I hope it gave you some new insights in the possibilities of creating user interfaces with WebCore. And I'm also, of course, eager to learn if there are specific other topics in connection with developing using WebCore or any of our other products. And that might definitely be something for a future webinar.